We're at 1 o'clock. I'm going to get started. The first few minutes are just me like introducing myself anyway. So if you're joining later, I mean, you all are here, but those people who are joining later, they'll be fine. They're not going to miss very much. We are recording this. Um, I'm sure that'll be released sometime, probably within a week. That's usually what conferences end up doing. There's a resources document I posted in Discord. I'll post it at the end again too. And feel free to take notes on the most important parts for you, if that would help. Hi, Max. I know Max from New Haven. Is anyone else here from DC? That's where I'm from. We're from all over the world. It's huge. All right. Welcome to Debugging Your Brain. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about me, your workshop host. I'm Casey. I like to blow bubbles. This is me blowing them in DuPont Circle in DC. And this is one of the first things I'm going to do once I'm vaccinated. I got my vaccine yesterday, actually, so I'm feeling a little sick, a little under the weather. I'm having a lot of water, but I'm so happy that I have that vaccine. I like to play instruments. I have one in every color, and I can play at least bad romance on all of them. That's my metric to say I know the instrument. Yes, got it. I love partner dancing, like swing and blues and country line dancing. I also like teaching. I've taught in a whole bunch of different circumstances, and you'll see some teacher patterns in me as we go through the workshop. Welcome to class. I've worked in tech for 10 years, most recently at USCIS as a product manager, and before that as a front-end Ember developer at Heroku. Lately, I'm doing freelance work. I have my own consulting business where I help teams become happier. Some people call me a happiness consultant. Teams are pretty happy when they get voices heard, when everyone's voice gets to contribute, and they're more productive. It's just like win-win for everything. I don't know why more companies aren't doing the things to make the team happier. It's totally worth it. But some of it is training, and you'll be getting this training today is totally going to help you make your team happier by making yourself happier. I did research a long time ago at Yale University, neuroscience, and I'm not going to go and define any of the terms in that line there. It's like jargon, 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 jargon. We don't need that for today's talk, but just sharing. I did neurobiology research before. Lindy Hop, I love it. That's, yep. I have the Discord chat up, by the way. Feel free to post as many messages there. It won't distract me too badly. If you have questions, I'll probably notice them there. That's a great way to ask questions while I'm in the middle of talking. I also have moments when I ask if anyone has questions too. We're going to be alternating some presentations by me and then some activities. Some of them will be solo activities where I'll ask you to type in Discord to share a response to a prompt. And some of them will be pair activities where I'm going to send you to Discord breakout rooms and you can talk with a new friend about those problems. We'll start with what to debug, and then we'll go into how to debug those things. By the way, if you joined after I gave my short intro, you didn't miss anything yet. I was just saying hello mostly. The real content's about to start. All right, what to debug? What do I mean debugging? You have probably experienced this before, a downward spiral, when you have negative thoughts that lead to negative feelings, that lead to more negative thoughts, and you just feel worse and worse and worse. It happens to all of us. It's a natural human thing to experience. You've probably also experienced rumination, which is when you're in a bad situation and you're focused on the negative parts, the causes and the consequences, instead of the solutions and being productive and looking on the brighter side and trying to get yourself out of it. It's easy to get stuck in rumination. I'm going to give you some examples from my life of downward spirals and rumination to frame things. Once at work, I knew how to solve a problem, the best solution, I knew it. But my coworker thought they had the best solution too, and we were butting heads, and we were like, no, my way, my way. And I don't know, it looked bad for both of us because we were disagreeing so loudly, and like, am I a bad coworker? Do I look too stubborn or pushy? Or if I stop, would I be a pushover? And like, oh, downward spiral. So caught myself there. Second scenario, My mom once yelled at my little brother for not closing the front door and then felt bad about it. She's like, why am I yelling about such a little thing? He could just close it. I'd be fine. We'll get into that story a little bit later in the talk. And a third example, once I was headed to a meetup, hangry, wet, and late, and I stepped in a puddle, and I thought all sorts of nasty thoughts to myself. And we'll investigate that a little later in the talk too. All right, there's a couple of types of activities. We're about to do an individual one. For an individual activity, you'll think about your response quietly to yourself, and then you'll share your responses in our sidebar chat here is Discord, because Zoom, we have it turned off, so it's not confusing. So I hope you have Discord open. If you're not in the Discord channel yet, please open the Discord, go down to the workshops section, and it's the channel Debugging Your Brain. Right, for pair activities, we'll do in a bit. We'll assign pairs randomly into breakout rooms, new pairs each time. You'll have to introduce yourselves a little bit, and then one person will share their story and answer the questions, and the other person listens. And then we flip roles halfway through. I'll send a little banner notification into the breakout room, and then you'll flip roles. And then we'll come back to the main room and talk about it. All right, here's our first activity. If you did the pre-work, if you checked out the GitHub, then you may have done this some amount already, but if you didn't, that's okay. I'm gonna set a 3-minute timer, and I'd like you to come up with 3 challenging experiences from the past month when you had or almost had a downward spiral or you found yourself ruminating, and share those 3 experiences in the chat. If it helps you, there's some topic areas on the slide here. I'll set a timer for 3 minutes, and if you have questions, feel free to ask those in the chat, in the sidebar chat too. All right, we're at time. I added an extra minute because I could tell 3 minutes is a little tight for this exercise. Thanks for sharing your stories, everyone. I want to call out that all of these challenging experiences are real and we can't make them go away. We can't make ourselves feel awesome about all of them, but we can make them better and we can stop ourselves from downward spiraling. That's our goal today, so that we don't think about it in counterproductive ways. We can think about them in productive ways. Throughout this talk, I have a lot of concepts I'm throwing at you. It's really dense, but there's this resource document that I sent in the chat earlier, and I'll send it again later, and it lists out all the big ideas. Just FYI. Here are 3 of them that are linked to through a link in there. One is a high-level concepts document. It just lists out the high-level points for each section. By the way, each one maps to a stage in my board game, which I'll show you a preview of in a minute, and a chapter in my book, both. The one in the middle here is a worksheet for a particular challenging experience, like the one you just thought of, those 3. You might go through each phase using that worksheet. And then there's a longer list of one-time activities like additional reading that you might want to do. All right, my big question in a lot of my life, a lot of my work lately has been, how can we help more people effectively deal with challenging experiences like these? What can we do to make people better at this? One option is therapy. When you go to therapy, you learn coping techniques for all of that. It's really the most effective one because it's personalized to you. A therapist is like a personal trainer for your brain. But we know there are a lot of barriers to therapy. Not everyone goes to therapy. Not everyone can get over these barriers. There's stigma. By the way, you don't need to have a diagnosis to go to therapy. Not everyone who goes to therapy has a mental illness diagnosed. They can still help you with coping techniques for stress and things like that. Anyway, even if you get over the stigma, you're like, therapy is great, I would go, but my insurance doesn't cover it. That happens a lot. Or my insurance doesn't cover anyone near me or anyone with availability. That is a big problem. And then even if you get through that, you might not find a good match therapist. You have to try a few before you find one that's really compatible with you. So there are barriers. This isn't my favorite to just say, everyone, just do this, because it's not possible for everyone. So there are other ones. Another one is individual learning. You can do self-help. There's a lot of like hand wavy self-help out there, but there's a lot of it that's grounded in science and study that really like point at evidence for the self-help. And that's what I'm going to cover today. A lot of stuff that's been proven through therapy. An example of that is books like Feeling Good by David Burns. This is the book that popularized cognitive behavioral therapy. And I get a lot of inspiration from that. I wrote a book because I couldn't find a reference that covered everything I want people to know that was small and short and clear and easy to read. So I wrote it. It took a few years, and I'm very proud it's done. It's only 90 pages and an hour and a half long as an audio book, which I got to narrate. I'm like, I like, that was a lot of fun for me. And we're gonna cover the big ideas in this workshop today, and you'll get to practice them, which is even better than the book often. I'm working on it as a board game. So in the board game, you take your challenging experience that you thought of from left to right through the stages by using skills and rolling dice and things like that. By the way, I'm looking for play testers. If you're interested, reach out to me afterwards. I always need more play testers. All right, a third approach, kind of like therapy and self-help. A third one is community, which really you need in addition to the other two anyway. You need people around to support you, who listen to you, who understand you, to have a happy and fulfilled life. Oh yeah, thank you, Kyla. How do I mute Discord? Mute. Got it. Thank you. We're all learning how to do Discord very well. Now it's muted. All right. What inspired Debugging Your Brain, my book in this workshop? Cognitive behavioral therapy, that's one I mentioned already. CBT is a talk therapy. It's an approach that therapists use to help people with mental illness like depression, anxiety, a whole bunch of them. It treats so many mental illnesses. It was like circling C on a math test on an SAT. It's like always the right answer by default in my undergrad psychology classes. It was just so helpful for so many things. For one example, for treating depression, CBT is as effective as antidepressant drugs. for treating depression. I like to call it cognitive behavioral training instead of therapy, because you don't need a mental illness to get the benefit of this. And you don't even need a therapist to learn these skills. You could read David Burns's book, or we're going to cover a lot of the ideas in this workshop. So it's really just like basic mental skills to cope with stress that we all should learn. And that's what we're covering today. I also get ideas from dialectical behavioral therapy, which is another talk therapy. In particular, from this, I pull the 6 levels of validation, which is like helping someone else feel understood. And that's really powerful. That's a whole section we'll get to later. All right, in this talk, we have these 5 chapters. They map to board game stages. We're going to start with introspection there. Yep, they match the board. For introspection, we'll start with system modeling the brain. This is the most generic system model that you can have, the IPO model, input, process, output. This probably looks familiar to you as a developer because you have worked with functions before that take arguments and have return values, and there's some code in the middle that changes stuff. It's a lot like that. Sometimes the IPO model is drawn with a feedback loop, the arrow at the top. That's like the application does stuff or the user does stuff, and then the function is called again later with a different input probably. We can model biological organisms with the same thing. We could even simplify it, just have it be input, output. In the classic psychology experiment of Pavlov's dog, he would ring a bell when a dog was fed a meal, and the dog associated the ringing bell with the feeding. And he would measure the output. The output was the number of milliliters of saliva the dog would produce in response to the meal coming or the bell ringing. And he learned he could train the dog to associate the bell with the food so much, even when there was no food in the room, just ringing the bell would cause the dog to salivate. So this is an example of like science measuring inputs and outputs. And there's like a black box in the middle. We don't know what's going on in the dog's head, but we know when we do this input, we get this output. We like to think humans have that thing in the middle, the process, the thought, every time, and we're like always in control of ourselves, so that you can't possibly model us like that, input, output. But often we humans are just like that. We're on autopilot, our habits are running things, and we just respond to our environment. In fact, most of the time we're just responding to our environment. But we can switch gears from the autopilot into a manual mode where we're more mindful and we're controlling that middle part, like hitting a debugger breakpoint, and you can manually edit what's happening there before returning, letting it go. So I have a technique for you to simulate hitting a debugger breakpoint so you can switch to a mindful mode, the Woop technique. So remember my mom, she was yelling at my little brother for leaving the door open. Well, we had talked about that she wanted to be more mindful more often, so we set this up. I'll tell you what happened in that moment. She was upset. She was like, "Why didn't you close the door?" And then my brother and I went, "Whoop!" We surprised her. She knew this was coming. That whoop was enough to remind her, oh, right, I want to take a moment and think about things before I just respond. And then she became mindful. She got into the whoop state. And she took a moment and realized, oh, I didn't eat today. It's already past lunchtime, but I didn't have breakfast yet because I'm a busy mom, like scrambling around all the time. And then she could get food, and she realized the door wasn't a big deal. She can move past that. So I'm so proud of her. She's very introspective when she remembers to be. The lesson here is you don't always notice that you could use a debugger breakpoint. And so the whoop can help you like shift gears when you notice that might be helpful. Sometimes when we whoop my mom, she doesn't think it would be helpful then. She wants to just move on, and she doesn't use the debugger breakpoint. She immediately continues. That's fine too. But just having the moment to consider whether you want to be mindful, it's pretty powerful. So the whoop switches you from autopilot to manual. And when you manage to do that, whether you do something in that or not, I want you to celebrate the fact that you noticed you could have used a debugger breakpoint there. That's great. That's awesome. It's hard to do the next steps. There's a lot of steps, and it's hard to celebrate them each step of the way. But I encourage you to be proud of yourself for each step forward. All right, full group activity. I'm going to count down from 3, and I want you all to whoop at home. You don't need to unmute. It's okay. 3, 2, 1. Whoop! All right, I'm ready. What am I introspecting on? Nothing right now. I don't want to do all the activities I wrote here, actually. This one I want to do actually as a solo activity. Think about one of the 3 experiences that you covered, and then share in the sidebar chat. Did you become mindful during it or after? Like, did you have a whoop moment, or did you reflect on it a day or a week or an hour later? And what prompted you to think about it more deeply in the moment or later? And what prompt could you try next time, like the whoop or any other prompts you can think of to help you notice? All right. We got plenty of responses in the sidebar. If you're still typing, feel free to finish. You haven't had a chance to skim the other posts. They're really interesting. I'm not going to read them all out loud, but I see themes. Some people manage to catch something in the moment. Some people notice later. Some people um, thought about it too much, and that's something we'll cover later. If you're thinking about it too much, what can you do instead? And there's no one right answer. It's based on the situation. Maybe you wish you could do it in the moment more often or less often or come back to it later. Maybe you can think of ways you'd like to change this, but there's no right answer here. I'm just trying to help you notice your own patterns. All right, so once we're in that whoop state, we hit the debugger breakpoint, introspection, we're in that moment. What do we do next? That's what we're going to cover in the next 4 sections. There's a whole lot of layers here. The one early one we're going to do next is identifying inputs. What are the inputs to your system? And just taking inventory of those. Then we'll talk about processing experiences, like how to put them into words and make sense of them. Then validating, how do you say that makes sense, especially with the help of someone else? That's very powerful. And then how do we change our thoughts, refactor them, edit them, make our habits more resilient in the first place. And that's the 5th section. All right, next section is identifying inputs. For this, I'm going to introduce an idea I call the inner versus outer brain. I'll illustrate with this cat gif. This poor cat turns around, sees something really scary, and jumps away. There's a fast response, the jump away. And then I like to imagine the cat investigates and notices it's just a cucumber, not a true threat, not a snake or whatever it thought it was. The fast reaction, a lot of it happens in the inner brain, also known as the limbic system. And the slower reaction, thinking and investigating, happens more in the outer brain, known as the cortex. You can see in the diagrams here, emotion has a short path to go through, and the thought has a long path to go through. All that outer cortex, it's much slower. It's like 1,000 times slower, the thinking versus the emotion. And that's good, because when you're in a scary moment, you don't have time to waste to dodge the scary threat. So that's true in general. Feelings often happen faster than thoughts. Thoughts are slower. All right, with that as a backdrop, now we'll go through the 4 inputs. So I've broken it down into 4 different categories of input to our system, the brain. And the process is you, your identity, your consciousness, especially when you're in the Woop state and you're being mindful and introspective. Right. So there's the things under your control that you can control. And then there's a lot that's not under your control. 2 things that are not under your control, but you might accidentally think they are automatic thoughts and automatic feelings. They just happen to you. They happen from your habits. You didn't think when you stubbed your toe on the couch to say curse words. The curse words probably just arrived in your head immediately. And the feeling of regret for not moving it or whatever, those feelings are probably not things you decided to feel. They happen to you. But you can decide what you do with those inputs. You can have deliberate thoughts, especially when you flip gears into the mindful state. You can think something in response to those. And you can also use those deliberate thoughts to influence your feelings. By steering your thought patterns into a different direction, you can change the way you feel some amount. So those 2 are under your control. What else is an input? External stimuli, anything that's not inside you. So you stub your toe on the couch stubbing event is an external stimuli. The thing happened to you. Or if you had an argument with a coworker, that's another external stimuli. The event happened in the real world. COVID is definitely an external stimuli. And you probably also have automatic thoughts and feelings about all those things. But the thing happened, that's true. And it's not under your control now, it's in the past. All right, the 4th one is your bodily state. This one can be elusive. People don't always notice this. My favorite example is the word hangry. When you're hungry and that makes you irritable, like my mom with my brother that once, it changes your response. And if you're not aware of it, you can't do much about it. You can't influence it. But becoming aware of it helps you have a handle on the situation. Another example is if you are tired because you didn't sleep well, or you're over caffeinated, so maybe you're on edge. That could make me disagree with a coworker more if I'm hyper caffeinated. There's a ton of ways your bodily state can affect the way you are, your mood. Yeah, so those are the 4 inputs. Those 4 I accept as data. They just happen to me. Here's another way of showing those. Automatic thoughts and feelings are part of you. Your bodily state is also part of you. And external stimuli happen to you, or they're events in the past. One way to get better at identifying these inputs is through mindfulness meditation. Meditation sometimes gets a bad rap as something spiritual, and a lot of people who don't like spirituality kind of avoid it. But I changed my mind when my doctor prescribed mindfulness to me to help me deal with problems. Really, the approach to mindfulness is becoming comfortable with the inputs to your system. That's the goal. That's what it does. And it's just like a structured way to get better at that. Yeah, non-judgmentally there, that word, I love that word. If you notice your inputs, but then judge them and feel worse about them, that can be pretty counterproductive. it's important to just take stock of them as data, as inputs neutrally, and then you're much more able to work with them. There are 2 apps that I suggest for this. There's a ton of resources for mindfulness meditation. There's so much online. But 2 apps I've used are Calm and Headspace. They help with mindfulness meditation training a lot. Even just the free intro lessons I found really valuable. All right, we have another solo activity here. For your chosen story, choose one of those 3 scenarios. Identify inputs from each of the 4 categories I listed out. Automatic thoughts, automatic feelings, external stimuli, and bodily state. And there's an example on the right there if that helps. It's not super important you get, you know, which input each thing is. Some things are multiple categories in a way, and that's okay. I'm just trying to help you search for, like, search in all 4 of those spaces for stuff so you don't miss an entire space. All right, I'll set a timer for 3 minutes for this activity and share this in the sidebar chat when you're done in Discord. Oh, I have music for us too. Makes sitting less quiet. All right, we're back. Thanks for thinking through that. Yeah, please share what you have. I see some discussion in the sidebar that meditation can be hard for people. That's totally true. A lot of people have trouble with meditation. I don't know what a doctor would recommend if you're not comfortable doing meditation, what the next line thing is. There might not be another like structured thing, but maybe different approaches to it could get the same effect. The goal is really mindfulness, which doesn't require meditation. That's just a way you can learn it. It's structured and like well known. If you can be mindful without it, that's great. Yeah, I like this sidebar chat a lot. Thank you. Back to this. Sometimes I end up focusing on my bodily state first, which is the opposite of a lot of people. Sometimes I'll say, oh, well, I must not have slept well because I'm in a bad mood. And then I remember, oh, I had a conflict with someone earlier. That's probably related too. So this helps me a lot to think about all the different types of input. A lot of people, I think, end up on other ones first and don't always think of bodily state right away. Whenever I have food poisoning, I have a really bad day before I realize it's food poisoning. And then all the conflicts I had that day, I can a little bit attribute to the food poisoning once I realize. All right, that was identifying inputs. Next section is on processing experiences. So you're at the point, you're in a mindful state, either during or after the event, and you've thought about what your inputs are, you've taken stock of them, you're comfortable with them as data, non-judgmentally. What's next? Processing techniques. These are all different processing techniques here. The weakest one is thinking. I have on the left there. We're going to go through why it's weak. And then the stronger ones on the right, talk to a friend or a duck or writing or reading, all have different perks, and I'll enunciate the ways in which each one is stronger. Thinking. So to be fair, most of our problems we get through by just thinking, and that's great. Most problems are small enough or they don't cause us to downward spiral so much that thinking is great. I'm not going to hate on thinking. But if you find yourself in a downward spiral or ruminating, it might be time to consider not just thinking, but doing one of the other techniques. Thinking is the most prone to downward spirals. My favorite is definitely talk to a friend. It can help in so many different ways. There are layers in which it can help. Sometimes I ask a friend, can I just talk at you? I want to verbalize my words out loud. Sometimes I ask a friend to actively listen. Like I want to make sure I'm making sense so they can say things back to me. Sometimes I don't want them to say things back. I just want to word vomit in their direction for a while. And I can ask for that. And some people are happy to do that for me. If they listen, if they do active listening, they're probably reflecting things I said. Oh, sounds like you're upset. Yes, I am. I just said that. I'm glad you're listening. Thank you. That's very helpful. I know they're paying attention. They care. Sometimes I want them to do a little bit more than that, even more than just reflecting back things that I said. I want their help in exploring the idea. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just want them to reflect back what I'm saying because I'm working on it. These are all different options. When I ask for active help, I ask things like, how can I say this? And then I'll say a very long paragraph and they can help me put it into like a sentence or maybe a word if we're lucky. In their own words. And sometimes it's great. And I'm like, that's it. That's my experience. Thank you. So like really helping me rephrase it. Sometimes I don't have a friend around, but thinking about a friend who would give good advice can help a ton. I'm always surprised how effective this is. I was just giving a friend support the other day, and I thought of a third friend who would have something wise to say. I said, you know what they would say? They'd say this. My friend was just amazed, like such good advice. It wasn't me or the first friend. It was the third person, my mental representation of them giving me advice. At work, especially, I do that a lot when I'm typing a Slack message to a coworker, and then I delete it because I already figured out the problem. Just by typing it out, I figured out how to, like the assumptions I had, I articulated them, and I didn't even have to send it. Sometimes I do that in an email draft. Like Gmail drafts are the most reliable text editor in my computer. They autosave really well. It's really quick to open up. All right, sometimes I don't do talking to a friend at all. I'll just talk to a duck or a cat or a plant. You've probably heard of rubber duck debugging. If you talk to anything that doesn't talk back, it's the same idea. So same as a friend, you can talk at your cat or plant. You can imagine what they would say if they asked questions, and that's pretty good too. That can be powerful. And this is just underrated, honestly. Every time I do this, I'm like, wow, that helped. And I don't do this enough. All right, next technique is writing. Writing helps because you write things down into words. Your words go into the world. They exist on paper. You can even read them so you can see exactly how it sounds once it was written down. It's like a perfect reflection of the words you said. You can go a step further with writing and you can even edit. So if something's a little bit off, you can edit it as it stands. I mean, out loud, you can kind of do that, but it's more like a pending forever. In writing, you can edit in place. And I find that valuable. I like that process a lot, editing. Some people call this journaling if they do it often. I call it journaling even if I don't do it often. If I send myself a long letter over Gmail that I don't send, that I'm just writing stuff down in, I'm like, that's journaling. I'm just like logging stuff that happened in my day and trying to process it, put it into words. That can be journaling. Some people find the habit of journaling, like a bedside table journal, to be helpful because it gets them into the habit of writing. But that's not the core part. The core part is that you're writing things down, getting your thoughts into words. All right, last one here is reading. This is different than the rest because you're not outputting anything, but you can still sometimes read ideas that are so related to what you're working through that it can be helpful. It's true for fiction. If there's a fiction character that has a similar struggle to something you're going through, that can be really helpful. See how they responded, how that worked out for them, how they verbalize it, because the author has to put into words what they're experiencing. It also works with nonfiction, like Ask a Manager has a ton of people writing in letters about a situation, and then they get feedback about what they could do. And that helps a lot, especially for situations where I don't have any friends who've been in that situation, but I want to hear about someone's experience with it. I can read about that online. All right, we will do a breakout room for this. There are 96 of us here. Hi, everyone. Uh, breakout rooms might be a little messy. If you end up alone, I'm going to be watching and like moving people around. So you can stay put until I get to dealing with putting you into a room. This breakout's going to be 3 minutes plus 3 minutes. So you each get 3 minutes to share. Your story is one of your 3 challenging experiences that you brainstormed in the beginning. Pick one now. Which of the 3 do you want to talk to with someone? And then in the breakout room, I want you to discuss which process techniques from this list did you use? Which ones could you have used? Which ones do you want to try next time? Like, how did you approach it? I'm also going to paste this in Discord, and I'll do that first. If for some reason the Discord one doesn't work for you either, you can also open up the Google Doc, the reference doc, and that has the prompts in there too. I have like layers of redundancy because Zoom never behaves for this, but we got this. The prompt is there. It's in Discord. That's probably the best place to get it. I'm going to do breakout rooms now. If you don't want to participate in talking, I understand, or if you're not here to accept it. So you can just stay in this room and ignore it, and then we'll be back in 6 minutes after that. Let's see how many breakout rooms it lets me make. All right, breakout rooms are set. Any questions before I send you out? Oh, you should also say hi and introduce yourself, of course. And that's true for every breakout room. All right, that's it. I'll see you back here in 6-ish minutes, and I'll give you a halfway warning as a banner at the top too. See you soon. Have fun.
You have any solo rooms with nobody in it?
Yeah, a lot of them actually. I'm working
Throw
on
one.
it.
Okay. Let me know if you need a hand. I'm happy to help.
Thank you. Oh, Kelly, are you my other co-host?
I'm not your other co-host. I've just
Oh,
I've
you're
done
just
one of
offering.
these before. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, if you're in this room but you meant to join a room, let me know and I can send you somewhere.
Sure. Mine was empty. I thought I'd come and see if you wanted to throw me
Oh, I
somewhere.
see. Thank you.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I also need your room.
who else was that?
Russia was my name.
Oh, can either of you see a breakout room button that you can go to one? If you
Mhm.
went to the room alone, then I could reassign you easier because I'll see it when I'm skimming.
Okay. I'm headed
Thank you.
in there now.
If you don't see a breakout room button, but you want to, um, there's a little bit I can do for that too. Anyone else want a pair? I saw a couple people just joined. We're in breakout rooms. They'll be ending in 3 minutes, and then we'll go back to presentation content. We are trickling back in. In the breakout rooms you were in, what came up that was interesting or surprising? I'd love to hear from a couple of you. Feel free to unmute yourself and share.
Hi, I have something to share.
Mhm.
My partner, she mentioned that I guess we kind of skipped steps in communication, and it didn't allow for both parties to give their full, like, get all of the knowledge needed so that they could have a complete reaction, I guess, to like the full information, like the full story. And so I guess like making sure that all of the information has been transferred so that the person can have like an organic and well-educated reaction is important.
In their story or in your talking to each other just now?
And their story, that was one of the things that came out that would have helped the process go well, instead of skipping to spiraling immediately before before elaborating before you spiral, so that you can make sure all your information's out there to the person.
Yeah, I like it. Thank you. All right, someone else want to share?
To be more general, I thought it was just interesting that as my like partner was telling her story, even though I did not experience it at all, I could fully understand like her thought process of like how she felt, what she thought when she reflected on it, even though I wasn't there, didn't experience it, just like kind of like basic human things that I like was like, yeah, I totally get that.
That's awesome. I love it. And hopefully they felt understood too. We have a whole section on that idea, how to communicate that you understand them. And you may have done that, and that's great. But looking forward to that section we'll cover soon. All right, next section. Another technique is to expand your emotional vocabulary. So people understand a lot of words. You understand a lot of words, but you probably don't use but a small fraction of those words. Here's a chart as an example. People like to use the ones at the top, like the general ones, happy, embarrassed, hurt. And we less often say repugnant and things like that. But the more rich vocabulary we can use, the easier it is for us to understand ourselves and communicate that experience to other people. There's a bunch of ideas here. This is one chart that I like. Here's another one, drawing emotions into a circle. It's a nice reference. And then here's my favorite one. This one, they did basically card sorting. They had students at the university go through and like group these seem like related emotions to me, and these seem related, and then what was the most tightly related ones. So for an example, I might use this chart and say, all right, anger in general, that's the high level idea that I'm at. What type of anger? Disgust? No. Rage? No. Irritable? Yeah, that's me right now. I didn't eat this morning. So maybe I'm feeling grouchy. So sometimes I use this chart and I drill down and I get a more specific word that conveys my experience better. I like this chart a lot. I come to this all the time. It's better than a thesaurus that just tells you like kind of related in general. This is like groups. The Wikipedia page for emotional classification I linked to in the notes has this in it, and the circle, a whole bunch of them. So sometimes I look at that reference when I'm trying to explain my experience. I want to skip that one too. Do I? Yeah, I like the later content so much. Maybe I'll do this as a solo. Let's do this one as a solo activity also. So go to the Wikipedia page for emotion classification. I'll paste the link in Discord. And try to come up with 1 to 3 new words from this that help describe your experience for the one that you've been talking about. I'll set a timer. And then when you're done, you can share your words in the sidebar. Setting a timer for 3 minutes. Although really I'll judge based on the sidebar. I'm curious also if you would like to share in the sidebar which reference there you used or which references on that page you used. All right, we've got a lot of good words in the side. I see insecurity a couple times, and that's a word I'd like to use more. Humans have a need to feel secure, to feel safe, and often that's a pretty good word to describe how I feel. Oh, some people use parrot. Cool, cool. Oh, most people use parrot. Yeah, parrot is my favorite one, and that's the one that I pointed at. So I guess it's not super surprising. All right, next section, we're going to talk about validation. This is my favorite part of the entire workshop because it's something that blew my mind when I learned it, how to validate explicitly, effectively, and to help friends feel supported. I didn't know you could do it in a very structured way. but you can, and we'll cover exactly that. Before that, though, I'd love to take a group photo. If you want to be included, please have your camera on. If you don't want to be included, you can turn it off. That's okay. It's going to take me a minute because technology. I'm going to take a couple photos because Zoom, but it's kind of like being together in person. I'll tweet it. Photos. All right, if you're on page 1, you can't possibly know this, by the way. Page 1, ready, 3, 2, 1, cheese. All right, page 1, we got our photo. All right, if you're on page 2, which again, you can't know what page you're on for me. 3, 2, 1, cheese. And page 3 has video off, which is okay, no problem. Thank you. I'll tweet those later. I wish we could see each other in person, you know. I'm not going to harp on it too much, but this remote thing, though. All right, next section is validation. The word validation, the definition might surprise you. It's different than the programming one. Validation in the brain is accepting another person's experience as understandable, whether or not you agree with them. Saying that makes sense. In programming, validation is often, we think about validating inputs. So emails are true emails that have an @ symbol and a .com, something like that, top level domain. It's kind of similar here. We want to make sure that what data was getting input makes sense. All right, when I say validate, who can validate who? You can validate your friends, and that's what we're going to cover. We're going to go through a bunch of examples of you validating a friend. You can ask other people to validate you, which can be a little trickier. You can also validate yourself. You can use these techniques on yourself some amount. Although for trickier situations, I find myself relying on friends, and I think that's normal and natural to depend on people sometimes. That's okay. All right, the validation levels we'll go through in 2 sections here. Listening at the top and then validating at the bottom. You have to get on the same page as the other person by listening effectively before you can really validate them in a way that's meaningful. We'll go through each level. The ones higher on this list are generally weaker, and the ones lower on this list are generally stronger for making your friend feel very supported. But you can't just jump to the end. You kind of have to go through them in some order. It's not a rough order. This is really a toolbox. It's a tool belt, toolkit, a whole bunch of different approaches you could take in a situation. And it helps me a lot to just have this enumerated so that I know what tools I have. All right, we'll go through the listening ones. First of all, if you're with a friend, just present with them. If you're just in the room with them, not saying anything to each other, you're not talking, they're not talking, that can be helpful. That can be really, I guess, validating in a way, in the broad sense of the word. It makes them feel supported, like they have a friend. Sometimes someone's not ready to share their experience yet, especially if it's very stressful or they really don't know how to articulate it yet. They just want you around. So here on the left is you, and your friend on the right is debugging their brain. They're working on processing some experience, and you're just sitting there quietly. That's great. Sometimes you can do a little better. This is more powerful when they're ready, and that's listening to your friend. You can just let them talk at you. This all looks very similar to when you're processing your experiences by talking to a friend. It's literally just like I flip the images the other way around. So you can just listen to them and let them talk to you and not even say anything back. If you don't say any words, but they know you're there and present and like attentive generally, that can be validating too, even more than just the silence. Sometimes you can do even better than just quietly listening. You can reflect back to them accurately, things that they're saying. I want to distinguish this from brainstorming and filling in the gaps, which is different. We'll talk about that a lot in a second. But first, this is just reflecting back things they said. So if they didn't say it, you're not saying it back. You're like only reflecting like a mirror stuff that they've said to you. And that's a form of listening that's safer than careful guessing in some ways we'll get into. If they aren't saying certain things and you think you have ideas how to fill in the gaps in the story, you can do so. But if you guess wrong, that can be invalidating. So they were having a conflict with a coworker, and if you said, "That's so unfair," but they don't think it's unfair, they'd have to say no, or maybe they think they're wrong, maybe it is unfair, but it's like destabilizing them in a way if you guess wrong. But if you guess right and you say, "That's so unfair," and they're like, "That's right, it is unfair," that can be really powerful. So if you get it right, this is more powerful than just reflecting things back. The key between guessing right and guessing wrong, how to do it effectively, is leaving room for correction. It's the way you say things. If you leave room for them to correct you when you make a guess, then you're less likely to have the negative effects of guessing wrong, invalidating them, and more likely to have the positive effects. Yeah, this is, I kind of want to tell you the next part, but I don't. All right, so it's hard to do accurate reflection without filling in the gaps with careful guessing. People naturally fill in the gaps when they're listening. But for this next activity, I want you to try really hard not to. Only say back things to the other person that they've said. You can ask questions still, but don't fill in the gaps with your own suggestions. That'll be in the next activity. It might feel a little awkward. That's okay. You're like learning a new skill here. That's the goal. So in this pair activity, I'm going to do breakout rooms again. By the way, there were more groups of 3 because Zoom, and that's okay too. You all can navigate that. Each of you present shorter, or if one of you just wants to observe, that's okay too. You can talk about that when you get into the room. I'm going to try to have groups of 2 though, as much as I can. So for this activity, one person shares their story, the challenging experience that you want to discuss, and the other person listens by, you could just sit quietly, both of you, if you want, or one person can just listen, or you can accurately reflect. That's your palette, but don't fill in any gaps yet. Any questions before we break out? Working on breakout now. By the way, if you are in a room alone, I'm going to be going through the list the whole time to move solo people into other rooms. So you don't need to come back to the main room to get support. I'm like actively doing that the whole time. So eventually I'll move you into another room with someone. If you don't want to join, that's okay. You can just stay in this room. All right, I'm opening the rooms. See you soon. All right, people are trickling back in. I think that means Zoom is moving us. All right, what did you notice during that exercise? What came up? What was surprising? What was interesting?
I thought that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I thought that accurate reflection is harder than I thought. And I don't think I do that well enough. And I would also love to know like a good example of accurate reflection, just so I can kind of better understand.
Yeah, good question. It is hard. That's why therapists train in this so much. Like the caricature of a therapist is saying, it sounds like you're feeling exactly the words you just said to me, exactly. Like a parrot. A parrot therapist, I mean, it's a challenging skill, but that's not always the most effective because they don't go deeper like we're about to. You can use your own words. I'm having trouble coming up with an example offhand, but I don't know. My best advice is to try different ways like you just did and see how that pans out, because it changes by situation too, whether they want to hear their words back, some people do, or if they want to hear different words to show that you internalized it. It varies by the person and the situation.
So is it a good strategy to first validate by saying it makes sense and then either explain it in their words or reiterate in my words of what my understanding of the quote unquote facts are, I guess, or feelings were?
Yeah, exactly. There you have all these options and you have to consider them and try them. There's no perfect order. I wish there was. That would be a lot easier. Often reflecting is a good earlier step and it makes sense is a good later step. Because if you say it makes sense too early and they don't think you really understand it yet, it's not so powerful. But it could if it is something very easy to imagine you would understand it already. So it's not a hard rule either.
Thank you.
Good questions. Thank you. All right, Zemek, do you want to share now?
No, I was just gonna say the same thing. Like the accurate reflection is a difficult technique. I found it challenging to come up with different words to describe the situation and reflection. So sometimes I'd hear certain words and thinking about what might be an accurate way to describe the same situation, but oftentimes I felt like just repeating the same words back was okay.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from someone when your partner accurately reflected back to you. How did it feel?
To use your word, it felt validating.
Validating. Yeah, sure. Yep. That's great. So that's a trap I fall into a lot. I feel like if I say what they just said, how is that adding to the conversation? It's been said, it's in the air. Clearly, I understand them because they said the words. But people like to get that reassurance that really they were understood. They weren't just saying things. They weren't saying things in a different way or like being misinterpreted. The goal here is understanding, really. And I fall into this too. I don't always accurately reflect as often as I'd like to, as often as would be very effective for helping my friends feel understood. It's tricky. It's hard. I find myself even immediately after giving this workshop still jumping to guessing more than I would like to. It's just so natural. All right. Anyone else want to share? We have another activity coming up.
Hi. It's actually not sharing, it's more a question. Let's say that you do realize that you accidentally invalidated the person. Is there like a quick way that you can like roll back in a way that makes the person feel more welcoming?
Yeah, I love that question. So there's like two things I suggest. One is to acknowledge that it happened. Oh, oops, I seem to have misunderstood you. And then try to correct it by figuring out what they were actually meaning. It's like, that's the repair part. It's like identify it, say it out loud, sorry, oops, I don't think I got it right. Can you tell me again? That's pretty good. Sometimes they might not be receptive to that. If they feel too misunderstood, they're already too down because they're in a negative state, maybe that's why you're talking to them. It might not be easy to recover. In that case, you can return later if they want to. And you can also share you're working on this skill and kind of enlist their help to be to like give you feedback on how you're doing it too.
And kind of, this isn't a question, but kind of going off of that, I found that if I accidentally get it wrong, if I preface what I'm going to say with something like, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, or what I'm thinking, but if I'm wrong, please tell me otherwise. Something like that just shows that if, like, I'm open to being corrected if I do kind of interpret that wrong. I have found that that usually helps, because then my guess is maybe they kind of prime themselves in case I am wrong. So then the invalidation maybe stings a bit less. That's my guess.
I love it. Perfect segue. Couldn't have been better. Thank you, Max. Room for correction is the key to guessing well. I have two techniques, and the next activity will be exactly this, by the way. There are two techniques I want to share, like Maxwell was just sharing, to leave room for correction. One is to have open-ended questions instead of closed-ended statements. And the other one is confidence level spectrum, saying explicitly, I don't know this, I'm not sure, or I am sure, if you want to guess, if you are confident and you want that bonus validation because you're so certain. So I like the ones in the middle, like, did that feel unfair? So I have a guess, I'm thinking about it, it's my own word, but I'm really asking, did it feel unfair? Instead of stating it, or open-ended, like parrot therapist style, just asking, but not really thinking about it with them at all. I like the middle a lot, but I use the whole range in different situations, different circumstances. Same for confidence level. I say must have sometimes, and people love it when I get that right. Other times I say I can't imagine, or I guess that would feel unfair. All right, so our next activity, I'm going to send you to the same breakout group that you were just in. I want you to do careful guessing. One person shares, then we flip, same as usual. This time I want you to carefully guess at thoughts or feelings the other person hasn't said, using the open, closed, and confidence level to cushion it, to leave room for correction. And if you're sharing the story, I mean, you don't really have to leave out details. There's going to be so many details. You can't cover it all immediately. This time I have it in Discord quicker. There, it's in Discord. I'll send you to Breakout Rooms 3 and 3 again. See you soon. We're trickling back in. Start up again in a second. Welcome back, everyone. All right, you know what I'm about to ask again. Same question. What did you notice in that exercise? What was that like for you? Feel free to share in Discord or unmute yourself and share with the group.
I could share one. One thing I was giving we kind of went a little long, but I was telling my story, so I was receiving the observations. It was interesting to know that even if something was slightly off, like an emotion described was slightly off, it still felt very validating to just have that dialogue about the issue that I was going through, even if it wasn't perfect. So I don't know, I think that's one thing to know is like your observation doesn't have to be perfect for it to be helpful.
I love it. Did it seem like they really wanted to understand?
Yeah.
That's great. I think that's the key, really.
Yeah.
Earnest desire for connection, understanding. Love it. Thank you. Someone else?
I have something. Yeah, I have something to share from the other perspective, being the person who is trying to guess, farther. And it happened to me that the person was describing a scenario where I have been in, and actually I have been in the other person's position, and I found it hard to be careful of not mixing my own experience into what's being told, because even though it's similar, it was different. So that's kind of hard.
Yeah, that's so hard. That's happened to me a lot too. Once in a while, I even go so far as to say, I'm not the right person to talk to about this. And that's okay too. I'm just like the opposite perspective in that story. And it's so hard for me to take their side and listen with them like I want to. And that's okay. Or even just knowing that's how you're approaching that is helpful because you can calibrate. Yeah, that's hard. Thanks for sharing it. Yeah, it would be interesting to me if anyone didn't actually do the room for correction ideas. Did anyone forget to accidentally? What was that like? It might not have happened because we were just talking about it, I know. Okay, maybe not.
Yeah, I think I forgot. Can we look at those again?
Yeah. I had open, closed, open and question, closed statement, and confidence level, just like saying how confident you are.
I think I found myself overcompensating a lot and being concerned about offending through high confidence. And so I would do a lot of would you say that? Or does it sound like, or am I understanding that correctly? So maybe in my head, it's like a high confidence, but I'm trying to say it out loud as low confidence.
Sure. How did that feel to do?
I think I was just scared that I would be wrong.
Yeah. That especially makes sense in this situation where we're really talking to strangers, people we haven't talked to. We don't have high trust with each other. Yeah,
So then is there a distinction between when you want to carefully guess and when you want to validate and
Yeah, this is the big question. Unfortunately, the answer is it depends. Different situations. If you have high trust with someone, you know them really well, you know their work environment that they're always talking about, maybe complaining about, maybe you can skip straight to validation for some topics, and that's great. But if you don't know someone well, I think the order we went through is pretty good starting point. You might just listen quietly, and you might just reflect back, and then you might carefully guess, and then you might validate. But along the way, I wouldn't discourage you from saying that makes sense either. It's just that that makes sense is more powerful once you have this shared foundation of understanding. And that's a great segue into the next section, validating, where we say that makes sense in different ways. Because of time, we're not going to have an activity for this. I'll just go through the content. So there are the 3 levels here. It makes sense for you as the lowest, me too is the most powerful, and anyone is in the middle. I'll go through an example of these. So it makes sense for you based on your past. I had some dogs growing up as a kid. They were lovely. They loved to be pet. And I had a friend who was afraid of them, and we had to put them in the backyard whenever he visited because he didn't want to be near these dogs. It turns out he had been attacked by a dog as a kid. So of course he's afraid of dogs. It makes sense for him based on his past. So that's you here. It makes sense based on your past. We're going to build this up to the next one. But if he was walking to visit and he walked past a yard with a snarling dog that was jumping at the fence, I could say it makes sense you'd be afraid of dogs based on your past, but I can do better than that. It makes sense you're afraid of a dog that's snarling at you that you're walking past. Anyone would feel that way. It's not just you. And often that's more powerful. Maybe I'd say both. Maybe I would acknowledge that it's like worse for him than other people, but in general, saying anyone would, it's a general human thing, can be more powerful than saying it's a you thing. So anyone can be a little more powerful than you. And then if I was walking with him and the dog was snarling, jumping at the fence, and I was there and I was also afraid, and I could share that I was afraid in that moment too, for real, not just theoretically, but that I experienced it, that's even more powerful. So that's putting me inside the anyone, not just that in theory, but I am experiencing it too, or I did experience it too. So those are the 3 levels of validation on top of those 4 levels of listening we covered. Often I use like all of them in different levels and different parts of the story. I can relate to one, or anyone would another, and then another third part is you. But I try to think about all of these levels and consider what's the most validating I can be. All right, so that's the validation levels. I could give this workshop in like an 8-hour format. We could do this all day and have more breakouts and more discussion, and that would be so cool. But we only have 15 minutes left. I'm going to go through the rest of the content. All right, asking for support. Let's flip it. If you want to ask for support, there are ways I ask for support that map to those levels we just covered. So for just being present, sometimes I ask a friend, could you just sit with me quietly? Sometimes I'll ask, can I talk at you? This third one here, accurate reflection, I say at work a lot. I say, I want to make sure I'm making sense. Could you say back to me what I was just saying? Could you please accurately reflect back? I don't say accurately reflect at work or with friends, but that's the idea there. And then for careful guessing, sometimes I ask, could you help me say it? How can I say it to someone else in a fewer words than a long paragraph? So that's like some ways you can help your friends support you in the way you need in the moment. And then for validation, often I just ask, does this make sense? How? Or like, how could I explain this to someone else? All right, that's all listed in the resources. Next section, techniques. Right, cognitive restructuring is our last part. All right, the 10 most common cognitive distortions are here in this diagram. Cognitive distortion, I mean, it's a mental shortcut, a heuristic, or a bias, you could call it sometimes. It's something in the brain that distorts reality by making it simpler or narrowing our number of options in front of us. We'll go through some examples of these. I won't go through all 10. In fact, there's actually like 250 of these that I have listed on my website if you want to drill into them. Someone made a JSON data structure of them, and I just made them visual and credit him. But anyway, here's the most common 10. For my story, when I was going to a meetup, hangry, wet, and late, we'll cover that. I heard myself think this automatic thought, wet shoes are the worst. And then I went, whoop, I thought about it. I did actually, because I wasn't sure if I was going to go to the meetup at this point. And then I identified that as probably a cognitive distortion. And after thinking about it, I labeled it, I named it. It's magnification. I'm blowing this out of proportion here. They're not literally the worst, obviously. Next thought, if I'm late, I shouldn't even go. That's an example of all or nothing thinking, or black and white thinking, or binary thinking. I like to say binary is for computers. A lot of people say that. We humans can have the full range of things. I also thought to myself, today sucks. Whew, this is a lot. Overgeneralizing the entire day. Oops, sorry, hit my mic. Disqualifying all the positive stuff that happened earlier in the day, including a lovely croissant and latte I'm sure I had for breakfast. That doesn't count. Today sucks. And jumping to conclusions, the rest of the day will also be bad, predicting the rest of the day. And that happens a lot. You'll be in a negative state and just can't imagine it getting better or having been better. But I noticed it and identified it. It took me a while to label this with all three because it's a lot. Today sucks is a very broad statement. So I had original thoughts, the ones I just said, and I countered them by saying less charged things like I am feeling frustrated. And it's okay to go late. People do it all the time. I said, today can get better. It took effort. It took effort to get to that point, to whoop, to think about it, to label them as those. And meanwhile, I was walking toward probably a meetup and a metro home, like same direction. I suggest you print this. It's linked to in the notes. This list of 10 is my favorite reference because it's short and it has nice icons. All right, we're gonna do overview of the content. So there's the resources document that I linked, has so many links, especially these three. Feel free to make copies of all the Google Docs if you want your own copy. Sometimes I change them. On debuggingyourbrain.com, there's a couple of resources. This links to a couple of those Google Docs, these three. If you want to get updates, sometimes I write new articles or make infographics or videos or do free public workshops with community groups. So if you want to hear about those, you can get updates. All right, what did we cover today? We covered introspection. We learned about the Woop technique to hit your debugger breakpoint. We learned about the 4 types of inputs that are not under your control, which you should ideally sit with comfortably, non-judgmentally, treat them as data, but that's a skill that takes effort to develop. We covered a lot of different ways to process your techniques, like thinking, which is the most risky one, and then talking to a friend or a duck or writing or reading. For a lot of these, it's hard to remember what options you have in a moment. When you're stressed, that's the worst time to come up with these. So it helps if you have a reference nearby, which is like those documents I keep listing out, or make your own, write your own out, email yourself something, put it on a sticky note. However, it'll help you remember to have these options available when you need them. We covered the validation levels. In particular, you learned the distinction between accurate reflection and careful guessing and how to do that well. We briefly touched on the most common maladaptive thought patterns. If you want to learn a lot about these, David Burns's book, Feeling Good, covers these in depth. So many examples. A lot of them are relatable. You can jump around the chapters to whatever topic relates to you. You don't have to read it in order. You can just find something relatable and learn about them there. All right, we've got more tools for you. Now you might feel inspired to have a brain trainer, a personal trainer, a therapist. If you want a book suggestion, Feeling Good is the classic one. Apps like Calm and Headspace are good ways to start with mindfulness meditation. And then if social anxiety is something you think maybe is possible you have, you could take a screening on the Joyable app, which some friends of mine have used, and they liked it a lot. That does CBT for social anxiety. It like gives you the same kind of prompts and questions that we're going through today. If you want a book forum for yourself or for a friend, everything we covered today is in my book, of course. And I give a lot of workshops. I have a prioritization one, team health and psychological safety. I love pulling psychology into tech. That's my thing. I do individual coaching for managers, employees, executive coaching. This workshop. I do this for companies and community groups, if you know any. Like I recently went to Chicago Ruby to hang out with them to give it. I love talking about this stuff. If you want to connect with me, I'm active on LinkedIn and Twitter. Or if you want to book a 15-minute chat, you could do that too. All right, any questions? Or I have questions for you if you don't have any. What's the one thing you're going to be excited about to share with someone else sometime this week? What's something you want a friend to know or a coworker to know?
I like.
Yeah, the slides are available. I'll post the link again.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, I really like the emotional vocabulary tool, and I'll definitely use it and share. So thanks for that.
Awesome.
And for all the rest.
Thank you. Anyone else? Feel free to unmute or put it in the chat, either one.
Hey, so I have a question. Somebody kind of touched on it earlier. I struggle with, with validating, and you said that the strongest way of validating is saying, that makes sense for me. I struggle with, not sounding like I'm making it all about me. So I'm always kind of, a lot of times I'll be like, yeah, I feel exactly that same way. And then I don't know where the balance is between, that being strong and that just being like, well, no, listen to this thing that happened to me.
Right. People do that all the time, and they do it from a good place. They want to help. When I do
Right.
that, I want to help the other person. I think the key there is if it will help them feel validated, it's worth sharing. But it can be distracting because it's on our mind. We want to share it too.
Right.
It's hard. Often getting on the same page first paves the way for people to be interested in other experiences. A lot of people want to be deeply understood through the listening techniques, the accurate reflection, careful guessing. They want that first. And then they might be interested in like other people's experiences or helping decide what they should do. But a lot of people don't want those until they are understood. And that's hard. That's not a skill we're really taught in general, is conveying that we understand someone.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm always thinking about how to get exactly what you said into the workshop better. Someone always brings it up, but it's just hard. I'm not going to say not to do it because sometimes it is very helpful and sometimes it's not. A lot of good stuff in the sidebar. Psychology and software development overlap. Yeah. Oh, by the way, there's a new Discord that opened this week called Empathy in Tech. I think you can find it at empathyintech.com. I'm not sure it's up yet. Let's see if it's there. No, we didn't get a link up yet. How can I invite you all when I get the link later? Maybe when I get the link for that, I'll put it in this Discord channel and you can come back to it then. I don't have it handy. If you want more people who care about empathy in the tech space, that's a great Discord to chat about it. A lot of people mentioned the Woop technique in the side here. I love that. More resources. That's awesome. I have two more things people ask me a lot. Why don't people do this more? A lot of it is time and effort and energy. Like a busy mother, like my mom in that situation, even if she has the skills, she might not have the time and energy to apply it. And that's understandable and okay. So the more time and energy we have to dedicate to this, the more effective we can be at understanding ourselves, which then gives us more energy because we're not spiraling as much. Another big thing is skill. People don't have these skills. They haven't learned them. They haven't practiced them. They're just not taught in traditional education. So now you have the skills. You've been exposed to these skills. You'll still need to practice them to get habits instead of just being able to do this when you're being mindful and you have a reference handy. It'll take a while before these become habits. And you won't always be able to do it because you won't always have the time and energy, and that's okay. Another thing people ask is, how do I get other people to do these things First of all, you can't get them to do it. You can't make people behave this way, but you can model this behavior yourself. You can share your experience. You can share you're working on it, and that shows you're open to people improving, including people around you. You can also share resources like books or YouTube videos. You can invite a friend to attend a workshop like this. There's a bunch. It's not just me either, but like bring a friend with you when you go to one of these. Any other ideas to help other people do this? It's hard. You can't make them. The people who need this the most on the teams I've worked on are the least interested often. I really admire people who do want to grow in this and are not good at conveying understanding and empathy yet, but want to, and they're working on it. And I would be happy to be on a team entirely of people who want to but aren't good at it yet. That'd be great, because like their intentions are there, they're growing. It could be stressful, but I admire anyone who's working on this. All right, that's it for our content today. I hope you learned a lot. I'd love to hear from you what takeaways you get. It's hard for me to keep going and giving these workshops during the quarantine because I don't get feedback from people. I don't hear from people. It's like talking to a computer screen the entire time. So if this is helpful to you, I'd love to hear it. It would help me keep giving workshops and spreading this message. Thank you all. Hope you learned a lot.
Thank you.
Enjoy RailsConf.
Thank you.
Thanks, Casey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Casey.
Yeah, thank you.